can. All right.
Very good.
Well, we don't really have any members, but I do have some good updates. So I'll just start with that and we'll see if any members trickle in. Oh, there's Wendy. She's in the waiting room. Um, okay. So I'm Krista Boucher. I'm your host for the member comment period this morning. Welcome to the Opalco board meeting. As a reminder, we record these meetings and post them to our website. Members are invited to ask questions or share comments during the first part of the meeting, and we'll have some time at the end for any follow-up questions. A few reminders, keep yourself muted, and if you want to make a comment, type it into the chat. So I see Bruce is in the waiting room, so we'll let him in. I have a couple of quick updates today. We had a really successful Tidal Island Way workshop with over 60 participants. We had a lot of great member questions about this pilot project. You can see the materials and answers to member questions in the appendix of the board packet. And our next topic is that now that we've moved officially into the fall season, you'll see our trucks out doing some right-of-way clearing throughout the islands. All of the major islands have a little bit of right-of-way clearing this fall. Opalco maintains our right-of-way along our power lines to help with faster outage restorations, safer conditions for our line crew, and for wildfire prevention. In a couple weeks, the team will have completed the Friday Harbor substation rebuild. This project has been active throughout the summer months and will be routing power starting next month. This new substation adds needed capacity to our grid and will be powering the next generation of islanders. We have a great Ruralite article coming out in October with more details about this project. Another exciting operations project starting in the next few months is the relocation of transmission poles off of Jackson Beach on San Juan Island. San Juan County is beginning a salmon restoration project, so Opalco is moving our transmission lines off the beach. These transmission lines feed all of San Juan Island power, and thanks to Island Rec for working with Opalco to get the new design in place in the best possible location and minimize our right-of-way clearing in this section of line. We also wrapped up the Washington State Energy Credit Program, and they gave out $377,600 to 1,888 Opalco members. That was in the form of a $200 bill credit. So that was a fun way to give our members some money that wasn't actually our money. So, so I just gonna check in here and see if there's any member comments at this time, and then we can move into our session here. Don't see any member comments right now. So I think, Vince, we can get
Thank you,
going.
Kristen. Appreciate that. So welcome, everybody. We'll start off our agenda this morning with the consent agenda. I assume you've all had an opportunity to read through that material, so I'm looking for a motion to approve the items in the consent agenda.
So moved.
Jerry?
Second.
Second, Brian. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Are there any opposed or abstentions? And hearing none, that is approved. Okay, Foster, board annual meeting dates 2025.
Yeah, here are our proposed meeting dates. We have a lot of flexibility when needed, but we want to make sure that we got on everyone's calendar early. And we have the ability to kind of move things around when needed. I don't know if anyone has any adjustments that they want to talk about now, but that now would be a good time to have that conversation.
That follows the usual third Thursday of the
Third
month.
Thursday of every month, other than the annual meeting and the festival day after.
Sure. That works for
And,
me.
And note that the July is also the one that we encourage staff to go up and have their vacation. We have the flexibility to put a strategic planning in the July one again if we want to do that. But this was just the regular ones.
Looks good.
Do you guys want to do a strategic planning meeting in July?
I'm going to reserve it.
Why don't we do that? We'll reserve the third Thursday of July too. We'll insert that in the next meeting notes. We want to go forward with that. And this requires a motion, Vince, if you want to, staff
Yep.
recommends that the board make a motion to confirm the annual meeting date.
I move we adopt the meeting dates as amended.
Mark
Is
has made a
gonna-
motion.
In addition to the legal counsel being the parliamentarian.
Correct, yes.
Thank you, Mark.
Mark's made a motion. Your second? Tom, got that? All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Hearing none, that passes. Thank you, Foster. Next.
Next topic. There's a resolution that we have from RUS. It was a why don't we go to the resolution itself? I don't know if you want to describe it at all, Nancy, but this certifies that the board let's see, what is the one? Nancy, why don't you just kind of go through the form 674?
Okay, it's just a resolution that Tom is now the secretary treasurer, but it's just the secretary is what they're considered. This is the RUS form. And it, going forward on 219s and loan documents, we need this in place, and it has to be a board resolution. And there's actually a little additional form, which I didn't bring because it's just names and addresses and stuff that goes along with it. But it's sent to Washington, D.C., and it'll become part of the record. So we didn't have to list Vince or Jerry because they remained the same. They were already on the, believe it or not. It's just been a while. Brian, you've been long.
So the form is actually the record of who the officers are for our US.
It's an additional.
Gotcha.
And they really focus on the secretary because that's who signs all the documents, the 219
sure.
documents that they're looking at.
Makes
Thanks.
sense.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Good.
So with that, if we could get a approval from the board to approve resolution 1-2024.
First one for this year. How about it?
Okay, looking for a motion for this?
So moved.
Mark, Brian, got it. Mark first, Brian second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Hearing none, that passes. Very good.
Thank you, Tom. We're going to keep your hand busy there.
No problem.
Okay, now Foster, what do you want to do on the 990?
Yeah, Form 990, why don't we just take care of it? Why don't we break into just temporarily have a conversation and come back into regular session, or we can wait until the very end to have an executive session discussion about the 990 and then come back into regular session. Up to you, Vince. Get it over.
Why don't we do that at the end of regular session? Because then we can just go out and back in again. And that way, if we've got a member or two, we don't have to estimate when we're going to get it done, come back in again, and they got to play video tag.
Yeah, it's good idea with Bruce here too.
Great. Okay. So let's go into the Baylor Hill update.
Delayed that Baylor Hill, we're still working with the county, coming up with our hearing date. We don't know what that is. We're waiting on them to review it with a third party reviewer, and we'll kind of get you back on the status on that, but we don't have anything new to report yet. Any questions you guys have on it? We can go through some of the old things that we do know that you may not be.
Who there could even give you an estimate of when it might be done? Is it Kyle or who is it?
Kyle's is the staff person that is really in charge or taking over the duties. Is
that permanent or is he's acting?
Acting. I think he's acting.
I think he's acting in the I think everyone is over on DCD side.
So they're still looking for a DCD head then.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's been coordinating our information. I know that we had discussions about some of the new hires, and we're assured that Kyle's going to maintain our continuity over with our permit that we submitted for Baylor Hill.
Okay.
Is the county still accepting public comment? Is that still accumulating and additional questions being forwarded to Opalco, or is the The clock stopped a little bit here while they're reviewing third
How to
party.
answer that one, Russell? That's a good question.
So they are still accepting the comments, but because it's been stale for so long, they haven't received any, so we have no further updates.
Mhm.
I think Wendy had a question. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Are we at risk of losing any of the grant funding because of the timing being so delayed? And if so, what is the timeline on that?
So I did just submit an extension, and Commerce is of course, there's approvals, but I did submit an extension for the solar. We're still we don't need an extension for the battery side of things, so we're looking good so far, but there's going to be a close of that window.
Because, I mean, at some point, the budget biennium will transition to the next budget, right?
Let's also remember the solar dollars are from the 2009 Recovery Act, so these are very stale dollars.
Yeah.
And remember, we're talking about the low income solar grant of $1 million.
Right.
That's correct.
And they've extended the same grant over the years, and hopefully that continues. But we do get nervous, no question about it. That's a really good thought, Wendy.
And we don't have any sense of timing or urgency or when that window could close.
So we're in the midst of filing that extension right now. Once the approval happens, we'll have another deadline for either extension or loss of those monies or completion of the project. So our filing right now would put us past our probable construction window, but and then some. So we put some wiggle room in there. So those monies could carry into 2026 if the extension is approved. And then we'll have to file for a battery extension by the end of the year. And I'm working with Commerce, but they don't want to file it too early. They want to process that paperwork in Q4.
Thanks.
All right.
Thanks. This item that we added kind of late to the agenda. It was our 2025 rate study. As we're preparing for our budget coming up in October, what we're going to get advanced with are some certain topics like rate studies and some other things. So this was really good timing that Brian brought up the topic and we inserted it. And what we did is kind of go through a sequence of events. We know we're going to go through an elaborate rate study cost of service analysis in 2025. So this is just a precursor to that to get everyone on the same page. We're not making any decisions in short term. And the decisions will be made, at the conclusion or tail end of the rate study that we're going to do in 2025. But as we were kind of contemplating our budget for 25, Brian said, hey, what about the rate discussion that we had about demand? And I figured, you know what, it would be a good idea for us to get on the same page, and that would help inform what the scope of work is going to be when we go to our cost service consultant that we're going to be hiring to help us along this process. And I don't know if I think I want to hand it off to you, Brian, if you're okay with that, just to kind of go through some of your thoughts on your preliminary slide deck that we had.
Thanks. So Apalco's rate design for residential members is pretty much the same as all other utilities, but it really doesn't work well for us. And here's why. Most utilities spend about 2/3 of their costs on energy. The rest is fixed costs like wires and employees. But Apalco is unique. We're the opposite. We spend about 2/3 of our costs for fixed costs driven by 25 submarine cables. Can we go to the next slide, the next one, please? So this is on our website, shows where the money goes here for Apalco. And you see in the blue one, about 1/3 is for power cost. And if you look then about all the others, we have our capital costs, our wires and so on, our line crew, operations and maintenance and so on. That's the 2/3 part. So this is very different than what other utilities do. Can we go back again now? Residential utility rates have two main parts. Every member pays the same service access cost, and for us, that's about $57 a month. Then members also pay for the energy that they use, and you see that in the kilowatt hours on your bill. But here's what the problem is. Most of our revenue is collected from the energy rate. It covers paying Bonneville's money for the energy, plus 2/3 of our fixed costs. If the winter weather is mild, the meters don't turn as much as usual, and Opalco has a revenue shortage. And this has been a problem for years. Sometimes we're ahead, sometimes we're behind. So we're going to discuss some ways we can fix this. And as Foster said, we'll be doing detailed work on this next year. You go to the third slide on solutions. So here are a couple of things that we could do. One is to remove the fixed costs from the energy charge so that the energy charge only covers our power costs, the kilowatt hours from Bonneville. And then we have to do something else to cover all that fixed costs. So one way to do it is every member pays the same service access charge to cover all fixed costs. So in other words, a big chunk will be the same on every one of our months, every month on meter. Or members pay some part of their fixed costs every month and a demand rate, dollars per kilowatt. So this idea of a demand rate, how much you're using on the system, has been done for decades for industrial customers. But not many utilities do that for the residential. But interestingly, some of them are beginning to realizing that's a problem and a solution here. Vince did some alerts, and he found that 4 co-ops in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho now have a demand rate for some residential members. And there are many ways to construct it, and that's something that we'll be looking at in 2025. And another thing we can do in adding into that is a time of use generation and or demand. So in other words, if you would really want, we prefer that people not charge their VE cars in the middle of the winter right during the day. We'd rather have them do it at night. And we have done that in the past. We had a rate for that. That might be something for us to look into in 2025. So the thing that I'm interested in is how we use our grid and how our members do. And I'd like to go to the next slide, please. So last January 12th was the highest load on the Opalco system ever. Hit really high limits. We don't have peak reading capability now on our meters. But so what we're going to using here is the hour energy use by the members. And so we have about 12,000 residential members. And what we looked at was what's the highest amount that they did during an hour of the year. I'm sorry, on January the 12th. By the way, there are actually a dozen more members that were more than 2 or 3 times higher than what's on this chart here. And I took them out because you can't even see them. They're really very different people. We need to figure out what's going on there. So again, we have on the bottom, the 12,000 members, and then on the upper kilowatt hours of what their use is. So interesting things I saw here during this January 12th. 723 accounts used no energy at all that day. And another 289 were only a tiny amount. So think about this, 1,000 people weren't even using the grid at all on the heavy used day. And we need to be thinking about that when we set our rates. And if you look at the far right there, around 12,000, There are 300 accounts that were over 20 kilowatt hours during their highest use that day. Any questions about this chart? Okay, let's go to the next chart. So in this graph, I added all of the 12,000 members. In other words, starting from the left to the right, I just started adding them up. And if you get all the way to the right over there, that would be about the 82 million kilowatt hours that were used that day. To make it easier, I did it in percent. So the interesting thing here now, looking at this chart, is the first 25%, the first quarter of our members only used 3% of the peak. You see how flat it is from 0 to 25. So a quarter of our members use very tiny amount use of the grid. Now look all the way on the right. The last 25% used more than half of the grid. So what this tells me is that we need to have a rate design that recognizes that some people are using more of the grid than others. And that's something that we should consider in changing our rate design. Next slide. So next steps, I think we need to do more analysis of how our residential people use their use their energy over the year. And because, for example, typically during the Christmas area, there's a very high use of people who are not around for most of the winter area. So we need to take a look, not just at one day, but figure out where the peak use is. We should find out what other utilities are doing to address this for residential rates. See what they're doing. We should present alternatives to the board and then phase in some kind of new rate design. And I think that's the stuff that we'll be working on in 2025. Any questions? Okay, I'll turn it back to Foster.
Great. Brian, thanks for that. That's really good work. Appreciate it.
And then,
Yep.
you know, what was interesting is we had this discussion about yours, and thanks for that, Brian. It kind of kicked us off, started thinking about different things. And then Vince goes, hey, I got a couple of slides I'd like to put on the discussion as well. So Vince, why don't we go into your
Sure. Let's
section?
scroll down. So I've been playing around with, for a while now, we've been talking about different rate structures and stuff like that. And I got really curious about it. So I did a little exercise. And so I took my house, years worth of stuff, and I just scaled it so that it became 12,000 kilowatt hours. So that the typical 1,000 kilowatt hour a month. And here was the pattern of usage. And this is what 10 kilowatts, 12 kilowatts, the solar generation pattern. And we're all familiar with that. The peak to trough there, it's like 6 to 1 in the summertime versus winter. So that's what you get. So let's go to the next slide. So I can break this down a little bit, but I did 3 exercises. So the first one, marked number 1, is the house without any solar on it at all. And so it breaks it down by month, and it shows the power flow. The orange column shows that 8,760 hours a year, as you would expect. There's the 12,000 kilowatt hours, and that's the kind of the breakdown by month, more in the winter time and less in the summer. And the grid is used 8,760 hours. So every hour of the year, Opalco is feeding energy into that particular house. So number 2, I made it a net zero house. This is kind of the worst case. So I stuck enough solar on it so that the total net generation of the solar equals the total load for the year. And this is the one where, people say, well, I don't use any power, I shouldn't pay anything. And, lo and behold, if you look at the hourly flows and then add them up by month, so the orange column shows that even though that's a net solar house, 7,920 kilowatt hours flow into it. And then in the summertime, primarily June, July, and August, the excess, when you're producing more than you're using, it goes back out to the grid, and that's where we pay the net metering charge on it. So in that case, the power cost for them is 0, and they basically just pay the facility charge. That would be assuming that the net metering was at the full net retail price. And 6,300 hours power flows in and 2,400 hours power flows out. So there's only 42 hours or 52 hours or 82 hours, 72 hours a year when the power stays inside the house. But the rest of the time, the grid's being used as a battery. You're either storing energy to it or you're taking energy from it. And in number three, I thought, well, what's the effect of sticking a battery on it? And this is basically, I'm allowing a charge-discharge cycle every day. And lo and behold, it does make a difference. Instead of 7,900 kilowatt hours, you get 4,800 flowing in and out, and more of the energy stays in the house over more hours. So half the time that the house is actually doing it. So it's a battery makes a significant thing. However, when you look at the costs on that, in the first one, Opelco gets out of that total $1,528, and when you add the fixed fee, so you get down to the column down here, number one, the total bill for that house is $2,200. And sure enough, 1,700 of it goes to Opelco, 500 of it goes to BPA, and the fixed covers 40% of it, and the kilowatt hours are taking 60% of it. So just like Brian indicated, that's where it's coming from. In the house with the solar on it, we get $1,000 basically total out of that thing. Bonneville gets 300, Opelco only gets 700. And when you get the total up there, Opelco gets 1,300 and the BPA gets it. So net result is $633 is disappearing in the ratio of the fixed and stuff like that. So you can make the case that in that particular case, we're not getting as much benefit out of it as we should. And if you actually sold a house at 7,920, you would be picking up the fixed costs that we're talking about. And then when you put the battery on it, it changes a little bit more too. So that's just food for thought, that in the rate making and stuff like that, this is a consideration. This is really what happens. And, every house is going to have a slightly different pattern. And when you put the assemblage together, you're getting something like this. All right, let's go to the next slide, please. Let's just skip this one. Go down two more. Here's an eye chart. If you're thinking about a demand charge, so the top one, this was really interesting. I don't know why this happened, but that big blue spike in the middle, that's a 8 kilowatt hour peak that actually occurred in my house at like 2 in the morning or something. I have no idea why that happened. I think maybe the freezer and the septic pump and the fans and the oven cleaner and a whole bunch of stuff turned on for an hour at that time, and we had this big spike there. But the bottom one shows what was happening if I'd had a battery on there. That big spike in the middle, and then the battery would have covered all that stuff. So rather than paying 8 kilowatts times a $4 per kilowatt, rather than a 32-hour spike, I got nothing out of it. Now, what's interesting is when you look at the economics, it's like, wow, let's just add a 24 kilowatt hour battery and save a whole bunch of money. It really only saves you about $100 a year compared to the case without a battery. So it'd take 240 years to recover the cost of that. So unless we think about what kind of incentives we want to have on a battery there, the concept of having a whole bunch of these things out there and people, providing it for us, we're going to have to figure out what the economic case is going to be, because it's simply just having it, unless you're having it there because you want to have the power available for blackouts that may occur or ride through it or something like this, makes no economic sense standalone by itself. And then next slide, please. So here's what I did is I did a comparison. So we'll take the battery out of it. And this is just a house. So the blue is a house without solar. The yellow is a house with solar. And I did what our current structure is, what a small demand fee might be, what a time of use looks like, and what a combination would be. And this is really interesting. So the first one, the current without solar, we pay about $2,200 a year. With solar, it's $672. And that assumes that Olympia goes crazy this fall and puts the net metering back to full retail and extends it out for a number of years. So this is what it would look like. So the solar's doing a tremendous amount with the net metering. If you stuck a demand fee in there, I just stuck a $2 demand fee and I jiggered the power rate so that the blue column without solar always pays the same $2,280. And I wanted to see what the effect was going to be. So the solar peaks up slightly because in general, for all those peaks that occur when you're not generating anything from the solar, you're going to pick up on the demand charge. So it only would reduce demand charges during the daylight hours. So you go from 672 to 795. Now let's take a time of use, no demand, just a time of use. And I arbitrarily stuck a 4-hour block in the morning and a 4-hour block in the evening, and set a 6 cents, 7 cents for the off peak and 18 cents for the on. And that 3-to-1 ratio is pretty much typical of what I've seen in utilities that are setting time of use rates. And so I jiggered them so that the same with the 2200. Now the solar person goes up to 1400 because obviously those time of use rates occur when nobody's generating any solar power whatsoever. So that goes up. And then you can make a combination. So you jigger the time of use rates, play with the demand rates, and put it together, and you wind up with something like that. So, the bottom line on this is it ain't simple. I think we need to think about what the effects are going to be, and you have to look at a large, a reasonable sample of different loads and magnitudes and patterns and stuff like that to see what the impact of these different rate structures are going to have to be overall. The problem with it's interesting if you have the time of use rate like that, and so it's like well, we're trying to incentivize people to use high loads during low power off power periods or something like that. Well, then you ask yourself, well, what if everybody, or if a large portion of them actually do that and they shifted in there? Well, then you got to figure out how much behavioral change is going to result in people not paying 18 cents a kilowatt hour and going to 7, and all of a sudden then you got a revenue hole to fill. You have to make it up some other way. So there are some complexities associated with this. So I think it's just simply urging that when we do the 2025 study, we ground it in reasonable statistical sampling and test what the various structures might be on it. When I did this exercise, my conventional wisdom thinking about how it might work was kind of blown out the window. So it's good to have some reality in front of you. And with that, thank you.
Yeah, so what staff did is we put some other food for thought as relating in the 2025 rate study. So let's go to the next series of slides. Well, there's industry standard rate design things that we always want to do. The principles, meet revenue requirements, keep it simple, and a whole bunch of things in between. I think you guys have seen those. So we just wanted to put those on the list. It says, well, there's a bunch of things we need to consider. And I think you guys alluded to them really well. I did want to make a note that we have an energy adjustment charge, an ECA, for those big weather anomalies that we have. So that's working really, really well. So just know that those big giant spikes are partially covered. Let's go to the next slide. So the way that we look at it as staff is you picture your income statement, and it's divided up into all the categories that are in small print on the right. I hope you guys can see that. But they're pretty standard stuff. I mean, power cost is the one that's 22%, the orange colored slice, if you will, and then everything else is what we need to cover. And when we get into these discussions about demand or not demand or TOU, it really has to do with the power related purchase power. And the big dilemma that we are always faced with is we still got the rest of the distribution to cover. And that's the daunting thing in our minds. Let's keep going. What does that translate to is kind of where we're going. Brian alluded to it. Here's the breakdown of, how are our revenues collected? And you can see that the fixed charge is the blue and the orange is the variable. But how are our fixed costs located? It's the inverse, right? So that's the blue area versus the orange area. And that's the problem that we're really faced with. So when solar people, for instance, are using the grid and are not using the variable component, then the grid is not being covered in terms of the cost. That's really the bottom line. And even if we change their rate structure, any solar generation that's used in the house is always going to be offsetting a retail rate component. So that's a beauty about, having solar on your roof. You always benefit from your system own use. Next slide. Considerations as we go through it, boy, it gets complex pretty quick. We always got to add the margin into it. So it's more than just the income statement. It's the bottom line. We know that the price of Bonneville Power, that tier 2 pricing, is going up dramatically. It's going to double in a year. It's expected to actually triple thereafter. And those are big numbers. So just that one component that we have out there, that orange slice of our income statement is Bonneville. Wow. I mean, that's something that we really need to pay attention to individually. And so whatever we do with the rest of the pie, We still have to deal with the TOU or components within the power rate structure. Fuel switching back and forth, if we make it, if electricity is actually costing too much, people are going to switch back to wood and gas, and that goes against the administration's goals of trying to remove carbon within our fuel mix. And we want to make sure that we don't buy all electric homes, so we're going to take that into consideration for the cost service study. There's some charts that Brian alluded to. We didn't know exactly what the intent is until we dig into the details, but seasonal members are at play, but we also have the way that the Bonneville power system is going to work. The seasonal issues impact when our residential customers are here, but it also impacts Bonneville. If there's a lot of water and it's packed in snow output, when the snow melts, it becomes water that's used in the dam system to generate power. If there's less and less snowpack due to global warming, then obviously there's going to be a kind of more of a glut in the springtime and then a shortage in the end of the year. That's going to be a big consideration moving forward with climate change. Solar profile, we know that we're about, I forget the last chart that we had that Jay put up there is, we're about 40% of what California's solar profile is. That's dramatic. So when we talk about solar here, just be careful when we tie it or compare it to California solar, because we don't have nearly as much as they do. It's not as intense. And then in the wintertime, it just goes away and we don't have the load, even though we're winter peaking when we need a lot of load. Solar disparity. These are important to note. We've talked about these things in different slides. The solar disparity that we have is there's going to be a point in time where we have a lot of solar on our grid and we don't have enough load to cover it, right? So if you picture the summertime and everyone's generating solar power, there's going to be a point in time where we actually have to curtail it because we don't have the demand in the summer for people to use it. If that's the case, just be aware that those people that have the solar curtailment says that we're going to turn it off and they're not going to get any revenue from that. And that's going to be something we have to navigate through, probably cause a lot of frustration. And when we have solar, there's always the grid subsidy going on. We talked about not covering a large portion of the fixed cost. So we'll take that into consideration. Margin drop, the more people that embrace solar, there's a slide deck that we've seen a bunch of times that you see a drop in our margin. And remember, we have to keep our margin up high enough to make sure that we cover our RUS loans and loan covenants intact. Rate components. Here's some just food for thought out there. We have we want to make sure that we recover our revenue associated with the cost to operate. We have 274 active residential services. We're only talking about the residential component about it. The service access charge is a flat rate that everyone pays. One of the things that we were talking about is breaking it out into individual components so we all know exactly what those are. When you have a big giant service fee or fixed fee, is it clear enough for the members to understand what they're paying for? And so maybe there's a little transparency thing we could do there to assist. I know we've had conversations about, if you have a large home, then maybe you should be paying extra. I think in principle, I think that's appropriate. Maybe there's different ways that we could address that. It's not a big revenue making item. It's just the right thing to do within our cost of service study. We only have, less than, a little bit, or actually a little bit over 600 services that are in those, I call them McMansion kind of large facilities that we have. Those are the 400 amp services and above. The overwhelming majority are still going to be in the 200 amp range. We also have a discussion about, seasonal versus, you can go to the next slide. We always have a discussion about seasonal people that are here. They have the ability to use power and they're not helping with a large portion of that because they're not here during the wintertime when our peak is. And so the seasonal people that are here are always something to consider as well. Energy block, if we got to be really careful in terms of what we want to incentivize in conservation and so forth. We were looking at TOU time of use and time of generation. Here are the window periods that we were thinking about. And then we would probably add a seasonal component to those as well, because your solar profile and some different between the summer and the winter is something that we need to consider for block limits. Let's go to the next slide. When it comes to our demand, it's really interesting. I think that it's more the next slide that I'm looking at. I think we can always figure out a demand and how to implement it. Time of use is going to be the same kind of thing. We can kind of figure out what those time blocks are. So I'm not really concerned that that's going to be a problem with us. I think it's going to be describing it to the membership is going to be a challenge. But the overall challenge that we're faced with is the balance, everything outside the energy. Let's go to the next one. Now, if you take your income categories and then you eliminate the purchase power, which is 23%, that blue one in this chart, then what you're looking at is the overwhelming majority of our cost components are made up of the other topics. Now, if we said we were going to just pass our power costs through, and then all the fixed costs were going to be under the fixed costs, our facility charge equivalent would be about $122, depending on what time of year and the day it would be generated. We're currently at a 57 level, as Brian alluded to earlier. So there would be a gigantic pricing, jump from 57 all the way up to 122 if you wanted to pass your fixed costs along. That's daunting. That's what's really going to create a lot of rate shock and a lot of frustration amongst our members. How we collect the energy side of it, I think, is going to be harder to explain, but we can do that. It's the balance that's going to be the challenge. When we were looking at increasing our facility charges more, I think people are thinking that the $57 range is what covers our fixed costs. In reality, it really should be up higher than the 122. Next chart. What I was trying to do is trying to figure out in orders of magnitude, we got to have some really thick skin, because if you looked at the fixed component that we have now, the facility charges, you'd have to add all those percentages up for admin, for member services, distribution O&M, transmission O&M, and then a portion of the grid. Well, you start adding those things up, no matter how you slice it, that is just a gigantic amount. Now, we could say we're going to do demand, or we're going to do a TOU, but that's really going to be more of an energy-related power cost, not addressing what the big issue is with the fixed cost. Maybe a little bit, you could say, what we did is we pulled out a portion of the grid charges within a demand. But again, you're still looking at overwhelming size of those fixed costs are just daunting. And I like the idea of trying to figure out cost categories so we can describe to the members why it's appropriate for everybody to pay those. But the dilemma is going to still be there. I think at the end of this 2025 rate study, we're going to have to look at a realistic communication plan that goes along with it, a phase-in program, because no matter how you slice it, those fixed costs are going to have to be addressed, and they're going to require some pretty good consideration on how to frame that up so it's understood by our members, if that makes sense. And with that, I think that kind of highlights what we're thinking about. We did have a couple charts on here about demand and some frequency of when you use your power. So as you can imagine, when you're in January, February, and so forth, you're going to be using a lot more energy because we're winter peakers to heat your home. That's that big old spike over to the far left. And then the balance is what your frequency chart is. In the summertime, pretty mild climate, so we're pretty good on that front. Let's go to the next one too. Here's kind of the demand frequency. So if you want to figure out, it basically says the same thing. You're going to be a winter peaker. Your demands are going to be really spiky at the beginning of the time frame. Then they're going to go down. So I think what we need to do is really understand the distribution of our demand charges and how those work as well. I think they were closer than I thought, which was interesting. I think of the next table, what we had is we were trying to figure out if we wanted to put a demand in, looking at all of our costs together, how much would that provide additional revenue, or we could offset that revenue from power costs. And this example that we ran, it was a distribution of when those dollars were, or when those demand components were were applied, that's the percent to the far right. And if you wanted to use a $1 per kW demand charge, here's some of the revenue that would go along with it and when it would collect in the given months, which is an interesting distribution. I was thinking it was going to be a little bit flatter in the summertime, but pretty interesting distribution for us. It brings in $1 million, so you can times it. So if you wanted to do a $2 kW charge, you can go up to the 2 million level, or do the math on however you wanted to look at that. But in terms of us collecting the revenue to cover our costs, we're looking at $35 million. So demand's going to be interesting. If you wanted to go really meaningful, then it starts to mirror a fixed cost, if you will. But we can run different scenarios in next year to really dial in what that is. But I know that we're going to come out of this rate study, and there's not going to be a clear solution, and there's not going to be a win. There's no silver bullet. There's going to be some costs that are going to require us to phase in and have good communication with our membership. Any questions?
Not really a question, but I'd like us to have a little bit of discussion about how to find the right people to do this rate study that can do the sensitivity analysis and enough scenarios so that we can understand what realistic choices we have out of this, right? I mean, going back to something that Vince said, there are a lot of assumptions and there's a lot of detailed data analysis here. And in the past, we've had Guernsey do rate studies for us for years, et cetera. And they do a good job in a very conventional way, right?
I completely agree with you. One thought, Russell and I were struggling with that before, because remember, Mike Searcy from Guernsey is retired. And
Sure.
So it's a good opportunity for us to really figure out something more innovative. I think the old fashioned way of a COSA, cost of service study, really looked at it differently. I mean, it was like there was these proxies for your income statement, and it was kind of the old fashioned way that leads to demand. And I think that we need to look at it in terms of our income statement, like I just laid out. And so I totally agree with you. One thing we could do is we could bring back, a competitive process for board consideration and really find and have you guys to be part of the process. Maybe we could bring back 3 to review and maybe give presentations to the board if you guys have an interest.
I think that's a great idea. I think another thing to help is to talk to some other utilities who are moving forward, thinking about this and what they did internally and who they use for experts on this, so we can learn from them. And I think that's a great idea, is to bring a couple here for the board and the staff to hear their story and see if they can help us move into the future.
Yeah,
we'll do that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mark.
Well, I was going to say, I think that's a good idea. And then I think, following something that Vince said, we should have a pretty good specification on our side of what kinds of scenarios we would like to see and how we would like to see sensitivity analysis around them, right? If, here we want to basically see what happens if the number of solar members fluctuates in a band, and we want to see what happens if people's demand, winter behavior fluctuates, et cetera. And we've got to specify that, because any outside consultant, they're not going to dream that stuff up for us, right? I don't know if you agree with that, Vince, but
I do, just because we've gone through it, and the standard consultant comes back with the standard answers. And we need to start thinking very differently than that as the industry evolves. So I really like where you're going with that. I know that one thing that I know is that we're going to accelerate, we're going to recommend in the 2025 budget, we're going to recommend acceleration of our new automated meter change out. We were just starting to see it on our longer term horizon, but I think the smartest thing for us to do is start implementing those in 2025. I was hopeful that we could we'd turn it off a little bit and delay it, just because the meter evolutions are getting better and better as technology is advancing. we may miss out on a couple bells and whistles, but I think I'm starting to roll out in 25 with 26 and the majority in those 3 years for 27 included. We'll get the majority of our meters replaced that will allow a lot more flexibility in demand calculations and rate analysis stuff that we're talking about today.
And
You know,
I think we might consider doing at least some of them and as soon as possible in 25, so we can actually get some better data on peak usage, since right now we only have hour energy.
And target who we need to swap out first to give us that data. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Anybody going to raise their hand?
We can do that.
I highly encourage you to take a study and try and find some consultant who's got some significant computational power behind them to do this type of analysis. And I think they can
Yes.
even apply some energy-based AI towards it. The thing to keep in mind and why we gotta pay attention to this in 2025 is because the legislature's got some stuff lurking behind there that can throw an incredible monkey wrench into this. And I'll give you the first one is the absolute lust the Department of Commerce seems to have for this capping energy costs for low-income houses at 6% of the income. When I looked at that in San Juan County, the numbers they gave us is we're talking about a $2 million shift. So, whatever rate structure we come up with, potentially up to 4,000 of these meters are going to have their household energy cap at 6%, not just their electricity, but the amount of money they spend on propane and wood and stuff like that. I mean, that's what's lurking in Commerce's recommendation to the legislature. And in my opinion, the legislature is going to jump on that. I love that. We're giving away free stuff. Let's do that. And those of us that have to implement it, it becomes a real challenge. I don't know what they're going to do with the net metering. I think the legislature then interested last time is bringing it back again for the 2025, and they want to go full retail and extend it. I think there were a couple of utilities in like we in one of the utility met the cap of the X% of the maximum load in some previous year, and so we get to do what we want. But I think they're going to rewrite that and say, nah, let's extend that to when they get to 10% for the next umpteen years and pay full retail. So we're gonna have to figure out what that's going to do. So we need a consultant who's also going to be nimble about the ability to incorporate what potentially would be legislative changes coming in there over time.
Mhm.
Well, that's great direction. I think I like the idea too, coming back and putting some potential consultants in front of all of us and trying to figure out the best one to do it, because there are some trade-offs that go along with it. So I think having us all hear the same thing is probably great.
Do we have any statistics on member generators in terms of PV array KW size? And with the Switch It Up program and more systems being funded going forward that likely probably implement storage now, I'm just curious what that load profile, generation profile, and as we have more and more member generators, how that may throw another wrench into our calculations and predictions.
We have all those stats. I think what we need to do is kind of pull them out and review them and see what we do have, and see if we have all the system size stuff and work with. I know Rain Shadow's on the mix too, and we should probably have good conversations with them as well. I know we have God, almost 800 now. I mean, it's becoming pretty noteworthy. I know Russell's pulling up some of the member generator stats that we got.
Yeah, I guess if that grows and if the system size increases and or you implement storage, what would that look like, over the next few years, separate from what Vince mentioned in terms of the net metering, political side of the story here.
Right. Right. Good thoughts. Well, I hope we can find a really good consultant, because that's what we need. We need someone that's really like the AI oriented is really important for us.
Yeah, AI or not, we need computational experience and serious quantitative experience.
Right.
Yeah, there's only so much I can do on my iPad.
Thanks for trying, Brian.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks for your words of wisdom. Those were great.
Yeah,
I've
good
got a
discussion.
couple of comments here, if I might.
Yep.
First of all, just on the solar generators, we're going to be getting up or we maybe are already, to the older systems that have been out there now for 20 plus years, they're going to start deteriorating in time. Are we dialing that into our thinking? And are people going to take them out as they deteriorate? Are they going to try and clean them up? Or are they just going to let them decrease by 3% a year or whatever the projected output looks as though it's going to be? And then the second consideration I've got in trying to sell these ideas to our customers. When just listening to the ideas you put forward in the last 15 minutes, it's kind of mind-boggling trying to understand and see how this is all going to fit in. I'm wondering if we can just, an initial study was to take what we got right now, which is basically the ECA charge, smooths out the peaks and the dips and everything else. And look, maybe as we grow here and we get in with all these other demands, try and model the stability of the ECA. Is it something which is going to now come in every month? Is it going to go up and down every month by some large amount? If so, that's going to be a real negative as far as customers are concerned. Or is it going to show a similar trend to what we've currently got for the next 5 or more years? If that's the case, why do we want to change anything?
Well, right now the ECA covers about a third of whatever that, whatever spike is. So I think we need to, obviously incorporate that into our analysis to make sure that we're, our goal is to get a lot more than a third.
In the short term, maybe just add a dashboard panel that shows the rolling variance of the ECA.
Right.
That'll give us an idea of how hard it's going to be to sell this. Whether it's the optimum method, the fairest method, or whatever, it's what we've currently got and what people are currently accepting of.
The part that's really, the other thing that's going to be hard, I agree with you, Jerry, is that we're also looking at just that one wedge. It's called power going up, doubling, and then basically going up by triple. I mean, just that by itself is going to create a lot of confusion. So adding in the rest of the components is where we need to really be on our messaging and be clear.
Yeah, but then that makes the power, a bigger cost, percentage wise, which I think provides more stability with regard to the fixed charge side of it, if you like.
Well, I think they're still daunting numbers, and I think the fixed charges are still overwhelming, whether or not it's a higher percentage or not. I think that's the frustration that the industry has always had, such a low facility charge, that the industry is faced with the same thing. We're no different than everybody else out there.
It's just going to get magnified. Jerry's correct about the ECA thing being fluctuating because, I can see not too long into the 27, 28 timeframe or something like that, the winter and the summer, besides the average going up, the volatility is going to be through the roof.
Right.
And those demand things. And so, we try to smooth it out with the ECA, but you're going to have that thing where, 8 months out of the year, you're going to have 4 to 5 to 1 differences in the dollars per megawatt hour at different times of the day, depending on how it's like this last July when the wind went to 0 for 7 days. It's like, well, where is Washington going to get power at that time, and how much is it going to pay for it? We never had, an ECA in the summertime that was going to be, like a $60 change on somebody's bill. And I think that's coming down the pike. So,
well, I think that's what you're going to see with a TOU as well. I mean, you're going to see some really big variation in your billing, and that, that's so far away from budget billing.
Yeah.
I think that it's helpful to see what's going on, but keep in mind the ECA only helps for the energy being too high or too low. It doesn't give us a penny more on our fixed costs that are in that rate component.
Correct.
So it only fixes a very small portion of our shortage.
Yeah, that's why it only does a third worth based on the math that we just talked about.
Wendy?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, so I really liked the slides of looking at those different scenarios with the battery and with the solar. But I'm thinking a similar analysis for anything that we're really looking at, where we decide what segments of households we want to consider the impact of this billing on, so that that can be really presented to members. So in other words, someone who lives in something that's more of like a apartment type of a dwelling, someone who's gone in the winter. You know, we have some categories of members here that are really different than in other locations, especially with all of the snowbirds. So I think it's important to show the impact so it can be presented to people of these different rate structures very transparently.
One of the things that we did, Wendy, that you'll like, and we'll do the same thing. It was a little bit of a challenge, but we'll try to dissect them better. But we did like a low end, like if you were on one of our low income programs, we're like, what did the average low income member impact be? And then we would run those scenarios, and or versus what if you were the average member? What if you're a heavy load user, a low load user? I mean, all those different breakdowns were really important for us. And we'll make sure that we, our goal is to make sure that we understand rate shock and try to minimize rate shock in every way we can. And the way that we do this test where what you're thinking is a great idea.
Yeah, because the other thing is if we segment it and then look at the model in some different segments, we might see places where the shift is less onerous on lower income or people who are using less power than people who are using higher power amounts.
Yeah. And we also, I always wanted to make sure that our assistance programs are independent of this. So if we need to consider additional low income programs, that we treat those independently and make sure that we take care of our, the people that need it most in our community.
Yeah, but I also just wanted to say our base rate of $57 to me personally is really reasonable, because in Texas, the base rate is $87 right now. So where they have lots of wind and solar and everything. Although it's not like people are generating it themselves, but the base rate that everybody pays is quite a bit higher than we're paying on the island for the whole state.
That's good to know. We always get comparison to like Puget Sound Energy, which is really low, but it's nice.
I know they're really low, but I just want to tell you where you have the whole state. It's
Yeah,
really
love that. It's good stuff.
Actually, that's a great point coming down. And I think, this problem is going to be hitting sooner than later. There's this mythology that seems to run around, and I don't know how many times I hear this when I read things like this, but wind and solar are cheaper than fossil fuel and stuff like that. And you say, is that really true? So it did some studies over the weekend on collecting what the going rate is now, and actually I think it's Lawrence Berkeley Laboratories tracking what the purchase power agreements are for wind and solar by itself, and then wind and solar with battery backup. And the average prices are now going into the $65 to $90 per megawatt hour, which is, it's a lot cheaper than the $41 we're paying from Bonneville Power Administration. So, and Puget Sound Energy is facing that already. I think there's a unsubstantiated rumor that they've signed up for one at $112 a megawatt hour, because they're scrambling to find stuff at the end, starting from 2026 on. They can't use any power from coal anymore. So they're in the process of replacing it. And people that are selling this stuff know they got them over the barrel right now. So there's going to be competition for that type of resource out there.
Just as a placeholder, also think of Bonneville. Bonneville has a limited capacity to use their hydro system to firm up intermittent resources. So they're coming up with a more notable charge. They called it RSS. I don't even know what the acronym is yet. But they're going to be charging a firming amount when you bring in an intermittent resource. So that'll bring up the cost of whatever that is as well.
They've also got a thing called the new large load. It's for, in theory, there's only 137 of us that can buy power, at preferred rates from Bonneville. And then the excess, they can kind of do what they want in the market. So, you're looking at these data centers and the crypto mining people and stuff like this that are flocking into the center of the state. And their rate for that starts at $75 a megawatt hour for those new things. So it's an interesting game out there right now.
That's what it is a game. I mean, if you looked at the reason that we get our preference power, we get our slice of the dam system, if you will, that's on a low water year. Well, typically there's more water than the lowest, calculation that they have. And that's what provides Bonneville with the additional power of what they have available above what the preference power customers get, and that's what they sell on the open market, which drives up the market. And then our tier 2 is based on that amount, so it is a big game. Good stuff, though. I like having these discussions, and we get some good consultants in front of all of us, and we'll continue down the road. Thanks for your wisdom.
All right. Excellent. Thanks. GM reports.
Go to the next page here. You guys are used to seeing. I don't want to go through them too fast, but those are the quick facts. Those are the dashboards that we have. We got a lot of great information that Russell just pointed to about the dashboards that are available. If you ever have any questions about, all the different diagnostics or real-time information that we have available to it, we're getting some pretty good resource availability if you have any questions. We're doing well in the safety category. You can kind of see our time that we've had without a lost time accident is up to 350,000. That's always important to note. Safety is number one in our world. We've been conducting this time of year we do our insurance inspections, so that also go along with safety to make sure that our clean working environment, safe working environment, go through all of our substations with our insurance representative, and really high marks. I think our crew has done a really good job and understands how to keep a safe environment, and it shows when it comes to the insurance inspections. Let's see, Krista alluded to the Jackson Beach transmission pole relocation project. If you know that over on San Juan, it's going to be a really good thing for the community. We'll have good access to our overhead lines there, and working together with environmental, trying to eliminate some of the environmental issues that they're having over in Jackson Beach and be part of a positive thing there is really, it's good. It's interesting talking to the people that live along that area, because there's still a little bit of a confusion on their side about what we're trying to accomplish. So if you hear anything and want to know any of the facts on that stuff, just send me a little note and we'll take it from there. Here are the grants that we have. Wendy, thanks for paying attention to the timelines, because as our community solar projects gets extended, we got to make sure that we can still satisfy what we intended to do for the low income programs. That's what started the whole discussion about Baylor Hill, was that low income grant. So to lose that would make us extremely sad. But you can see the different grants that we're seeking. The number one on my list, and it always will be a new redundant cable that goes from the mainland to our area. It's really a planning issue. We want to make sure that we could run, we have 2 cables that are Bonneville related that come from the mainland. We want to make sure that we could run our entire service territory on just one of those. And we're starting to reach capacity on one that won't allow that to happen. So that's the big push. And as we get into more and more connection for renewable, both energy and load for electric ferries and so forth, we really need that cable. So that's going to be a really big one. We had a really good discussion that Krista alluded to on the title project. We're going to keep having more and more of those as we go. And I think they're very fruitful for us to really engage with our membership and on every level, so they know that. I think one of the takeaways that I had with the title project, people thought it was a foregone conclusion, or at least a handful of people did. And then once they realized that we were going to study it and make sure it was worthwhile for us before we would invest into something like that on a permanent basis. So stay tuned on that one. It's always good discussions. The grants are.
Couple of questions for you, Foster.
Sure, you bet.
With regard to the new cable from the mainland, what timeline do you see this is a kind of a must-have kind of date being to serve our needs going forward?
For a third cable?
Yes.
I think there's a little bit of flexibility. I don't want to scare everybody to death. I'm trying to put a date around it. I think we have an opportunity with the grant funds, is really why I'm pushing it, Jerry. We can run our utility on both of those cables successfully. If one of those cables blew out, that's where the problem starts. So it's really how long is a risk question. And I'd say we just have increasing risk as we go. I think that we need to target at least 2040 is a really big date, because that's when we're trying to get the electric ferries here in that range. So I kind of put it out there as kind of a must-have that we need to start really pushing the $100 million cable, the new one. I know we could survive on the two that we have right now. We're going to be doing some more investigation to try to get a handle on that risk profile. So we're going to be doing some flyovers and looking at cables that we have and making sure that they're not in a condition that would require us to accelerate it, which would raise up the risk.
But there's not great certainty associated with the ferries, is there?
Well, there's not a lot of certainty on the cable side as well. I mean, we got to, right now there's we have older cables that are end of their original projected lifetimes. But so we're on time where we think the cables are in good condition, but there's still going to be a question of whether or not we're on borrowed time on the cables too.
This is why it'd be really good to have a conversation here with the head of transmission at Bonneville to come visit and give them some questions in advance.
Yeah, I think part of our goal with that Russell and I have been pushing it to making sure that we have this section and the section for Burroughs Bay calculated and make sure that they have it on their planning cycle. Part of what we're discussions are about is what our load is, and our load on those two sections are what's going to be challenged. We have a requirement that's like 100 kW for the line that goes to our Burroughs Bay substation, and that's what Bonneville's been using for that area, as well as is the submarine cable. So as we start to approach that automatically kicks off that planning effort that you're alluding to, Jerry and Brian, and we're beginning to have those conversations.
But then my second question relates to these tables. Going through them, I couldn't determine at what time do we project that we'll be actually doing this is for the tidal project. What time we'll be doing flow measurements in the water, so to speak.
Yeah, it's coming up. What is the month for the fly? We have this little environmental window that we have. It's at the tail end of the year. Russell, what is that?
So we have to we've got two of those measures going on. One is a survey of not only the seafloor but some other just it's bottom surveying, things like that, so we can understand what kind of surface is on the bottom. That's going to be happening in the next couple of weeks, leading into mid-October, just before we put the ADCPs in the water. That's the measurements that you're referring to. Those units are going to be in the water for 3 months. Now, this is all preliminary for the preliminary studies. This is first round of this. So that's coming up here in October for the next 3 months.
And they're going to be in the water
We're
for
talking fourth quarter then. Is that what we're saying?
Fourth quarter, that's correct.
This is going to happen in the fourth quarter of 24.
Right, and we're narrowed into specific windows based on regulatory measures. So we can't do this before September 1st, and we can't do it after February. So we've got a 6-month window to get it done in, and UW is going to be deploying those with their vessels and things like that in mid-October.
Okay, thank you.
And the stretch of cable, it's MVA. I misspoke. 100 MVA is kind of our stretch that we have with PSC's Burroughs Bay sub and our submarine cables. That's kind of the threshold that Bonneville's been running on. Good chart. Let's keep going. I'll go through the budget side. Everything's going well in terms of the dollars, what we projected versus what we budgeted. We were thinking there was going to be, the El Nino, La Nina kind of situation, and our projected budget is higher in terms of revenue. Our cost of power is up higher as well, but not notably. Our margins are still up dramatically higher than what we budgeted for, which is a good thing. And to start the end of the year, if it turns out to be colder or warmer, we're in a good situation to start that last push within the last cold months of the year. So things are looking up there. We have our equity position going up higher than we anticipated. It's nice to see it going above 41. Again, that number needs to be continually go up so we could afford the capital projects that we would invest with RUS and borrow funds. So without the equity to borrow those funds, so we would be in a different borrowing situation, and we'd have to come up with those funds internally. So we got to keep going on the equity percentage increase. So that's positive news. Everything else is going well. If I had to replicate any year, I think 2024 would be it. Let's keep going. ECA charge works well. I like your thought, Jerry, of making sure that we include that in our cost of service study. Well said. Heating degree days, we're tracking. We started with a little El Nino kind of lower year, and now we're getting back in line. You can kind of see the chart. To roll that up a little bit, Russell. There you go. So now we're going to see whether or not we're going to be along the 10-year average line, which is the yellow line, or whether we're going to be colder, which is the blue line, or red is the warmer El Nino condition. And we're doing pretty well so far. I think a lot of that has to do with people are spending more time in their homes. After the pandemic, people seem to be working more remotely here. So that's a good thing to have. Let's keep going now. Same kind of thing, weather forecasting. Everything looks good. We're starting to see a little uptick in red. If you looked at, I always pay attention to the chart on the right, and if you see a lot of blue spikes versus the red, if you get into the detail there, that really tells us where we are in our location of the country. Thanks for that. Member services, you can see how the energy assistance funding is being helped. We do a lot of great stuff for our members. It's always impressive when I compare our programs versus other cooperative utilities, and then you get surprised by some black box calculations come out of the Department of Commerce in Washington and Olympia, and some of those spikes that they're talking about that Vince alluded to, a $2 million in addition to our great programs, is something that we're going to always have on our radar. Rolling to the next slide. Good on LIHEAP, good on Department of Commerce for the grant program. Nancy just already alluded to the fact that we have, or Krista did, the fact that we had $200 bill credits laid out to our members, so good numbers there. And our switch it up, I love watching these things. You switch it up, it's our ductless heat pump. It's always a race in my mind between those, or 6.6 million. And then you put the solar storage together, and that's 6.8 million. So we're looking at more solar dollars going for our relending program than ductless heat pumps. It's kind of a good milestone. Energy savings, that you see the rebates that we have that are typical that go through Bonneville Power Administration. You can kind of see the distribution of the rebates that we have. Solar program 800. So we hit a milestone. We got 800 solar arrays now interconnected on our grid. That's high marks to our switch it up program. I think that's really a big attribute on why we see so many of those on our system. Community solar, stay tuned for Baylor Hill. Hopefully we can get resolution with that in short order and kick that off pretty quick. Here's our Decatur project figures, and then communications. It's always about our Island Way workshop, and we had a good little tidal generation project that we had a good workshop for, and I think that went over well. We answered a lot of good questions that were raised by our membership. Resource fair, and that's always fun to work with the kids. And our Rock Island snapshot figures, always good on those two fronts. And with that, I think we can resurrect that 990 topic, Vince.
Okay, let's do that. So we will need to adjourn into executive session for now. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, let's stop. Okay, having been in executive session and reviewed the IRS Form 990, I'm looking for a motion for approval.
So moved.
That's Jerry. Is there a second? Got that? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
And any opposed or abstentions? Hearing none, that is approved. We thank you for your work on that, as
So
usual.
could we repeat that line just for the recording? Could we repeat that line about when it becomes available with the IRS?
Yeah, once it'll, let's see, once the IRS makes the form available and complete their process and becomes available on their website, we will post it on ours as well.
Thank you, Foster.
Thank you, Mark.
Great. Okay,
We have some good succession planning and some other things to talk about in executive session.
okay, so I want to propose a break here for a second. We'll start that back up. So it's 9:52 right now. Let's get back at 10 after 10. If that's okay.